Hello and welcome to Finextra. I'm Emily Horler and I'm joined by Keith Saxton of TechUK, and we're at Fiserv's Banking on the Future event. Thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Why is legacy technology such a problem for the financial services industry?
It's become apparent that the legacy, so-called legacy, is becoming an issue that doesn't go away. So I think traditionally one would have seen in downturns or in sort of bear markets that people would take a bit of time. They'd introduce some new services or new regulation, they'd do multiple technology projects, and they'd maybe wait for the markets to get back together again, and then it wouldn't be necessarily a big issue. There are two or three different pressures, I think, this time around. One is that we haven't had a traditional bear market. This is very much a recalibration of the financial system. A lot of this is because of new regulation, very particularly the new capital intensive regimes. So it makes it harder for the business model to continue delivering the margins that were happening in the past. Technology, of course, is moving as quickly, and the thing with legacy is that if you're going to introduce services that people actually want. So in other words, if you think of anything to do with big data, anything to do with predictive analytics, anything to do with knowledge that comes out of data, you have to expose that data. If you think of the need to look at risk data aggregation as an example, if you look at the need to do stress testing, if you look at the need to do rescue and resolution planning, all of that requires you to have a technology infrastructure that is not only modern, robust and scalable, but it also has to be very secure. It has to be quite open and modern. And this is sort of really the point of no return, I think, is what we've been saying from TechUK. It's not that everything everybody has is rubbish. That's far from the truth. But it's also far from the truth that new entrants, brand new sort of fintech startups will change the world on their own. And so there is a collective conversation, I think, to be had around what do we really mean by legacy? What do we mean by improving those systems? What do we mean by customer-driven services? You know, what do we mean by knowledge and data and all of that?
What are the key areas of technology that banks should focus on to achieve transformation?
So perhaps the way we used to think of this in the past would be a core system replacement. Those core system replacements have had pretty checkered history. Some have been successful, some not so successful. Generally speaking, they're all very expensive. But is that really the way to go here? So a good example would be, instead of ripping out everything for a new core banking system that might take you 2 or 3 years, would cost you lots of hundreds of millions of dollars in all probability, what are those services that you really need to provide? And are some of those services too intermingled, right? So a lot of the expense in the legacy is in the complexity because of the nature of how people have put this stuff together, how much of it is interlinked, how much sort of proprietary middleware, if you will, is needed to sort of link all those systems together. If you then take a view that, well, actually, the industry, the technology industry itself is very much moving towards a as-a-service technology industry. So we could talk about cloud and API, for example, in the way to potentially think about leveraging those technologies to deal with some parts of those legacy issues. You know, so stranded data in old systems, you might expose those through a micro cloud. You might then join up a lot of data sets through open APIs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some slightly different ways that people are beginning to articulate a technology architecture that give you some idea on how things might be a little bit different from a technology setup.
What role can outsourcing and utility plays have in helping banks transform their technology?
Well, this is part of the game, I think. So again, you come back to, has the business model changed? Yes. Is there as much profit in paying for an awful lot of internal capability that is non-differentiating? Well, that's a bigger question, right? So over the years, we've seen a lot of industry-owned utilities be very successful. So we could talk about SWIFT or CLS or part industry-owned groups like, you talk about DTCC and Euroclear, for example. So those so-called utilities that support the industry are already there. However, you could look at other parts of the value chain in financial services. So, for example, having your own reference data, which might be, even if it's 1% different from somebody else's reference data, even internally, is going to represent a big expense. There's nothing differentiating about having your own reference data. Right? The other thing might well be some standard processes. So there's been a lot of focus recently on utilities being set up for KYC, which is account opening would be another situation there. So some of the processes, some of the things that banks just need to do together are perhaps open for dialogue around how, either a bank-owned utility or an industry-owned utility might work. If you looked further into the wholesale market, there are various examples of things that could be done much better in terms of shared infrastructure, perhaps. Some of the initiatives around what you've got approved for MiFID, for example, may not be differentiating to you as an organisation, but you absolutely have to do that. So you can think of this technology infrastructure being available in a broader sense that might be better in a shared environment. And of course, utilities have some future proofing in that, not strictly true, but if you're part of a utility, then to some extent you're all in it together in terms of how you're upgrading your software, how you're upgrading the technology. It's not always you to do something proprietary.
Keith, thank you very much.
Pleasure, thank you.
And thank you for watching.